Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Let the filibustering begin.
Welcome to Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome to Filibuster here on the Nerd Party Network. We're back to just one episode a week. That must mean the marvellous April-May period that we had of just reviewing non-stop Marvel movies and Infinity War. I think we did a couple of episodes of that. We can now finally get back to just discussing random movie topics that don't involve Infinity Stones, superheroes, or small Ant-Man, Spider-Man. So it's quite exciting to be somewhat liberated from discussing Marvel for at least a couple months anyway. And so I kind of sat down and I thought, what do I want to do next? And me and Dallas came together and we thought, right, what could we do? We could do this, could we do that? And I think it's safe to say this is one of our favourite directors, and we're going to have a wee discussion about some of our favourite Edgar Wright moments. So I'm glad to be joined by you today, Dallas, for that.
I'm glad to be here. Looking forward to it.
So kind of like before we kind of dive in, because we've picked 5 moments each from the anything Edgar Wright has directed or created or been involved in, and picked 5 moments that we think, you know, are our favourite or we love. Mine are just 5. I've not got them in any sort of order. Unlike yourself, Dallas, who's more kind of on the ball with this, you've given yourself like a proper 5 to 1.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, the idea is inspired because like my blog's called Championship Celluloid, so I've sort of gone with a high fidelity style top 5. So you absolutely have to rank them from 5 to 1. So yeah, no, it took a lot of time. It was one of those things which you just like it. You think it's going to be easy because you love the director so much and there's so many great things he's done, but then actually trying to wheedle it down to just 5 moments is very, very, very difficult.
I know. I think that kind of sums up why this is such an exciting episode for us, because I'm curious as if I have all these moments, because there's so many you could pick. It could be a simple shot, it could be a character, it could be, you know, a scene, editing, montage. It's so difficult, but there's so many great moments, and we don't know either of each other's lists, so we could easily kind of cross paths on this. I hope not, but there's just so many moments to choose from, so it is such a challenge.
It is, yeah. I think what I've done, I think basically most of my list is, because it's Edgar Wright, I've gone with more directorial choices rather than maybe like line readings and stuff like that, because there's so many great line readings in space. I mean, I know I always say pudding now, the way that David Walliams says it in that episode of Space, and there's just that Reece Shearsmith, oh no, I hadn't thought of that. So, but I mean, I think I've gone with more of the sort of directorial choices, but it'll be interesting to see what we both come up with.
Yeah, I've kind of gone something somewhere similar as well, that it's just moments that seem to just kind of sum up Edgar Wright and why he's one of my all-time favourite directors. And, you know, I don't know him personally, sadly, but like that, when I think of him, I think, man, that guy is so great. That's what makes an Edgar Wright movie so great. That makes why, you know, when his movies become announced, you think that I'm going to be going to see that straight away. So I'm excited to hear what you've got. But kind of before we dive in, there was something I wanted to ask you, that you, unlike myself, have actually been in the presence of Edgar Wright. Can you tell us a little bit about that kind of adventure and all-nighter that you went to?
Yeah, it would have been about 5 years ago now, actually, and I went down to the Prince Charles cinema in July of 2013 when they did the Edgar Wright all-night marathon, and it started off with Fistful of Fingers and ended up with Scott Pilgrim. This was just before World's End had come out, so that came out a couple of weeks afterwards, so we had to go see that separately. But Edgar Wright very sort of turned up and sort of introduced the evening, and then came back in the morning with Nick Frost to sort of take questions and stuff like that. And there was a chance to see sort of little bits of almost unseen footage in between the films. You got to see like the Don't trailer that was in Grindhouse. And this was back in the days when he was going to be directing Ant-Man, so he did actually bring the footage of some test footage that he'd actually shot for the film, which was sort of a sort of fight sequence, which was exciting to see. But it was just great to see sort of everything back to back, because it wasn't just his movies; it was also both seasons of Spaced as well. So it ran from around about sort of 7 in the evening till about sort of 7, 8 in the morning. But it was a fantastic evening, and I went down dressed up in my Shaun of the Dead costume. I didn't take the cricket bat because I couldn't really take that on the plane with me. But otherwise, it was a very authentic costume, I thought.
I mean, yeah, because I was so jealous of that. Like, I've been to a couple of Prince Charles all-nighters, and they're the best place to do these things, I think. And I remembered seeing the photos of that, photos you were sharing. And I was like, oh my god, I'm so jealous. I wish I'd gone to that one, but I just couldn't justify it at the time of heading down to London. I was skint, and I was just remembered hearing like, oh my god, they're going to get to watch Spaced on the big screen. Edgar Wright could be there. It's just going to be so awesome. It sounds like these type of fan events that I don't think they've ever done an Edgar Wright one since, like, on that scale. They've done, like, the Cornetto trilogy and things like that. But if they did it again, I would be there in a heartbeat. Anytime he's got a new movie coming out, I think, oh, hope they'll do that kind of event again. That would be great, but it's not been forthcoming yet.
Yeah, no, I mean, it'd be great to... I would happily probably sit through it all again, because then it'd be another 4 hours more, because, yeah, you would get The World's End and Baby Driver in that. But, I mean, yeah, the audience, I mean... At those events, I mean, the audiences are basically pure hardcore fans, because no one else is going to sit for sort of 12 hours watching an entire filmography of a director back to back. But yeah, no, it was a fantastic evening.
So let's kind of...
And morning, I suppose.
Absolutely, yeah, you certainly earned your breakfast that morning. So kind of like... Let's dive in. I think, yeah, if you want to go first, I'd love to hear your pick for the number 5 Edgar Wright favourite moment.
Okay, number 5 is one of my sort of favourite sort of characters in an Edgar Wright film. It's not the Cornetto trilogy. It's actually from Scott Pilgrim versus the World. And for me, my favourite sequence in that is Chris Evans's Lucas Lee. Just from the moment he sort of comes out in the trailer to the sort of the Universal theme music. But for me, it's just one sort of single. I know I started off saying I wasn't going to do line readings and stuff like that, but it's just the way that he sort of looks at his phone and looks at a text and then just sort of goes, "That's actually hilarious." You know, it's like the lolling sort of saying basically how you're feeling. But for me, that's one of my favorite sort of moments in that film.
Yeah, that was so close to being on my list. So if it didn't make it, I went for a different Scott Pilgrim scene instead. But it's just one of these scenes where I think it, like, I love this sort of moment where, I suppose, spoilers, I don't think it can be classed as, but when he's skateboarding down and him and Kieran Culkin are just watching him just go and go and go as he just spirals to his death. And it's just so absurd and just deadpan. I absolutely love it. It's such a great moment. Yeah,
it's just the sort of bit when he's like, can you do a grindy thingy on that rail? And he's like, you're not going to go me into this. There's girls watching. And he just sort of does an eyebrow lift and then just, get me my board. And then Wallace is like, hey, big fan. He's like, yeah, why wouldn't you be? So yeah, no, I think it's just a great performance from Chris Evans. And yeah, sort of against type, I guess, these days thinking of him as Captain America, but this was pre-Captain America. And they say that, it's such a shame that Edgar Wright never managed to make a Marvel movie, but he did make a comic book movie, and for me, one of the best sort of comic book adaptations. And, it's a film which actually features Captain America, a Superman, Captain Marvel, and probably a few other superheroes in there somewhere as well. Yeah,
we could have a future Squirrel Girl. I think Anna Kendrick's always kind of petitioned to do that role, so maybe one day.
Thomas Jane's in there. He was a Punisher at one time as well. So
right, yeah. There's definitely another one, is there not? Oh, I'm going to go mad. I'm sure there's another superhero in there somewhere, or maybe I'm just imagining it. It'll come back to me in the middle of another list.
Aubrey Plaza's in it, and she was in Legion now, so I guess she's been a superhero, supervillain.
We'll go with that. I was just going to say, like, I'm just curious, what are you, and I suppose I maybe ask this kind of as we go along, when the kind of movies come up, is like, what is your kind of thoughts on Scott Pilgrim versus the World, like as an overall film and kind of his kind of catalogue?
I think it's a great film and a really sort of underrated film that people don't really seem to talk about when they talk about comic book adaptations. I know it didn't do very well at the box office. I mean, there's probably a number of reasons for that. I mean, it's not the most well-known comic. I mean, I hadn't really heard about it until it was announced that Edgar Wright was adapting it, so that's the way I got into it, and but really enjoyed them. And it's a very sort of faithful adaptation until it sort of gets a bit Game of Thronesy in the fact that the film was kind of finished before the final book was out, so it kind of goes off in a slightly different direction. But I know I think it's fantastic, and it really sort of showcases what Edgar Wright can do in terms of editing, and I think it's a huge precursor to what he's actually done on Baby Driver, but people haven't really sort of unfortunately seen that yet. So it's definitely one that people should pick out, and it is a world away from sort of the Cornetto trilogy because there's no one involved in that. He wanted to do something completely different, and I think he achieved it. What about yourself?
I think it's probably my favourite Edgar Wright movie. I remember going to see it the first time. I went with a couple of friends, and they came out a bit like, yeah, it was okay. But I don't know, I just sort of sung to me because it almost reminded me sort of a Wes Anderson movie in a way, because it was such a lived-in universe with such an incredible attention to detail in every scene, with every character, and it helped having this sort of 6-book series that they could kind of dive into to kind of flesh out these characters. So they're not just sort of living scene to scene. You always get the impression that they've got a past and where all these people have come from. And I think it's just it's just brilliant. Like you think of like comic book movies and they're very much like shot like action movies or adventure movies, but this just feels like it's an out and out comic book movie video game adaptation. And it's someone like Edgar Wright that you can tell lives and breathes these subjects and passions, and he's brought something to the screen so faithfully. I mean, there are certain scenes, for example, I've got the colorized versions of the books just kind of a stone's throw away from me, and I just think like some of the scenes are just like shot for shot exactly the same as the comic book, which I'm not a big fan of those sorts of things in general, but I think the fact that him and the author and creator Brian Lee O'Malley worked so closely together meant that it felt like a true representation of the books, that vision with that Edgar Wright twist, and and I think I just love it.
Yeah, no, I mean you've got like it's like the images and words popping out the screen, like the thwacks and pows, and then even sort of like doorbell things like knock knock and ping and stuff like this. I mean, it reminds me of, I mean, in a really good way, like it worked really well on the original Batman show, the Adam West one from the 60s. But if you look at Ang Lee's Hulk in 2003, it tried to be very sort of comic booky in sort of terms of framing and stuff like that. And for me, it didn't work, but this works perfectly, I think.
Yeah. So my first kind of choice, as I say, mine is just not an out of order. It's sort of a more chronological order. I've gone from sort of the start of his career up to present day with my list. So I'm going to start back with the TV show Spaced. And one of my favourite moments is the paintballing episode, where it just summed up perfectly. It was just a scene that gets me every single time, and it's something that reminds me of the sort of thing I would perhaps do, because I always sort of looked at Tim and thought, yeah, he's the type of person that I could maybe be if I like gave into my worst demons, for example, of being a kind of fan, nerd and such like. But it's just the scene where like kind of Tim's facing off against Dwayne, and he's just like, Dwayne is like the smooth Peter Serafinowicz character. He's like, I'm better than you, I've prepared for this, as Tim is completely out of paintballs at the time. And then just Mike, who I think is the best character almost in space sometimes, just runs in, throws his guns to Tim, takes the paintball bullet to the heart, and then just like Tim aims it right at Dwayne and goes, "It's not a bed sit, it's a flat," and then shoots him in the balls. And it's just like the moment afterwards where like Tim goes to comfort Mike, and he's just like, it's almost like Mike's dying, he's got like paint coming out of his mouth, and it's just like, "You can't die here, you can't die here, I love you." And it's just like, and then Mike dies, and then it's just like this dramatic no, and then it's just immediately undercut to like Tim and Mike leaving the paintball and going, "We should do this again next week." And I just think that is just such a great comedy moment. I remember just seeing it for the first time, and it just hit me right in the comedy bone. I just think it's such a great comedy moment, and it shows kind of Edgar Wright can go from sort of dramatic, sort of that almost parody of kind of action beats to then immediately kind of making it into a comedy scene, and then it's always just finding the comedy moment in drama, really. And I just think like the pairing of Nick Frost and Simon Pegg was one of the best things to come out of Spaced, and I think what obviously we get next, where it's sort of the bedrock of the Cornetto trilogy. It really was kind of created here in space, and thank God they took Nick Frost out of a Mexican restaurant and cast him in this show, and the world was great ever since.
Absolutely.
Really.
I mean, it's a great sort of spoof of all those sort of war movies where they're sort of saying, hold on 2 more seconds, the chopper's coming, buddy, we're going to get out of this. And he's like, I'm not going to make it, and stuff like that. So it's just a great sort of a spoof of the sort of the war movies. But yeah, it was probably the first sort of hint that those two could do sort of slightly more emotional stuff, which is one of the moments which didn't make my list, but reminds me of is sort of one of the final scenes of The World's End, where the two of them are fighting in the final pub, and it's sort of revealed that Simon Pegg's character has sort of tried to commit suicide and has been doing all this, as sort of one final hurrah before potentially taking his life again. And it's probably for me, that scene in The World's End is the best acting the two of them have done together over their whole careers, I think.
That nearly made it onto my list, was that final scene from not final scene, but that scene from World's End. I think, World's End has obviously it's got its critics, and it probably is the weakest of the Cornetto trilogy. But that scene in the acting and that kind of darkness, it's like Simon Pegg is fantastic in that scene. It's such a left field turn that this character was someone that had self-harmed, and this was, as you say, their last hurrah. I thought it was such a great moment, and it was so close to being on my list as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, I actually rate The World's End a bit higher than most people, but I'll discuss it a bit later because it might be making a reappearance in my list slightly later on, so we'll see. So my number 4, going up to number 4 for me, is a bit from Hot Fuzz this time, and it's the greater good scene where Nicholas Angel finally sort of realizes what's been going on in the village of Sanford. So yeah, Nicholas Angel has spent this whole time in Sanford, having moved from London, basically thinking that there's a murderer going around Sanford knocking people off, but everyone sort of said, oh no, it's just accidents. Sanford is the safest village in the UK, that nothing like that would ever happen here. And it basically turns out that the Neighbourhood Watch Alliance, or the NWA, has been offing people, and it's not for any sort of sinister overall thing. It's basically because they don't like them, or they've got a funny laugh, or their acting's really bad, or just anything that might threaten the fact that they might, because they're up for the Best Village award, and they don't want anything to stop that, especially living statues. And just the way the sort of reveal happens, and it's just fantastic, I think. And it's sort of a very sort of Wicker Man-esque vibe at that point, where one guy realizes actually that the whole town is conspiring against him, and it features just a great sort of villainous turn by Jim Broadbent at that point.
Yeah, I suppose you say the Wicker Man, Ed Woodward, the famous copper from the Wicker Man, kind of makes an appearance on the council as well, and yeah, I think a fantastic choice.
Yeah, no, I actually rewatched Hot Fuzz again this morning, and I realised there's actually a scene in it where it basically says, we have to do what we do, whatever the cost, to make Sanford great again. And at that point, I was like, oh my God, is that where Trump got his slogan from? Was he watching Hot Fuzz one night and basically realised, that's a good idea, I'm going to use that? Because it was only watching it back at now that you realise that the village of Sanford would have voted Leave in Brexit. And they probably would have voted for Trump as well, because, they don't like outsiders and stuff like that. They're very much a very insular community. So, yeah, they would have definitely voted for Brexit.
You see, when you watch some of these movies, sometimes they become something different to what they really were. And last year they had the Edgar Wright event at the Edinburgh Film Festival, where they showed Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, and Scott Pilgrim as sort of interactive fan events with themed parties and food and drink and everything afterwards. And they did the Hot Fuzz event, and there was it was shown in a church. They had a county fair. There was free cake. And that line, when it came up of make Sanford great again, just got this huge laugh, and everyone sort of nudging each other, and it's things like that would never have happened in those original screenings when we went opening weekend or whatever. So it was it was just so funny to see how that movie's evolved, and no one will, as you say, no one will be able to watch this movie without associating with Donald Trump now. It's nailed on.
Yeah, no, I know, because Hot Fuzz for me is potentially, I think it's the strongest overall film in the Cornetto trilogy. I think it's the most complete, and I think it's sort of the best in terms of like scripting and sort of action and stuff like that. But I mean, there were so many bits that I did think of. It's just like Paddy Considine when he sort of walks out of shot and then comes back in shot.
Yes.
That was, for me, is like one of the best gifts to ever come out of the Cornetto trilogy. And just, it's probably the first film I really started to notice sort of Rafe Spall as an actor, as one of the Andys, and just the whole sort of, you want to be a big cop in a small town, fuck off up the model village.
I was so close to quoting that line there as well, so I'm glad you got in there before me.
Yeah, and then there's just the, stand-up cheering it, when he drop kicks an old lady in the face as well. But they were just all sort of, just 2-second long moments that I want to go with something that shows that, that even on the surface it was one thing, that actually, that there was something else going on underneath as well.
Absolutely. Well, I'll with one of my ones. Like, as I say, I kind of did mine in chronological order, but if you mention the movie and I haven't mentioned it yet, I'll kind of dive in. So one of my moments is also from Hot Fuzz, and it's the my here comes the fuzz as they arrive at the Safeway, and I just think it's like Edgar Wright. We know him as this like guy that lives and breathes action movies. That is some of like the films that he kind of grew up on. He's influenced by, and then like Shaun of the Dead, we get like little bursts of sort of some action scenes, but it's all quite relatively intimate because like ultimately the budget, and there's only so much you can do with a small budget and zombies. But this movie contains so many kind of like standout action scenes. Like, even though we kind of get the battle in Sanford like town centre before they head to the Safeway, I just think the Safeway one is kind of what I think is almost like a perfect blend of Edgar Wright styles. That it's like this huge action scene that's given sort of a really unique British twist. From like, there they are fighting in a supermarket, they're using trolleys, there's like bolognese being used as blood, like you've got the butchers throwing knives. It's just perfect, like a really great action scene. And I just think it's just, you watch it and it's just so funny to see them like going, right, here we go, right, here's one of our big action set pieces, we're doing it in a supermarket, and we're going to embrace what that set is. We're not going to try and turn it into something completely different, where you think maybe something like The Equalizer, where you got it with like Denzel Washington. It's like this really sinister like scene where people are using like the equipment there, like the gun, what's it called, the nail guns.
Yeah.
Like, this is like trolleys. Like, they're like, right, what can we use, what's here, and what can we do to make it like properly funny and like a great action scene at the same time. And I just had to include it as well because it's got Timothy Dalton in it. I love him in this movie. He's like, I think he's potentially the best James Bond, and I think in this movie it gets to showcase that comedy side that, if you kind of know Timothy Dalton, he's really good at that sort of really droll, humorous side. And it's just the way he goes that, my, here comes the fuzz. So good. Oh, no,
I think that Timothy Dalton is probably like, one of the MVPs of this film. I thought he just plays it just perfectly smarmy and sinister, that leading up to the thing that he clearly seems to be the main villain of the piece, but then there's the twist later on where it turns out it's actually all of them. But I think, there's that great sort of airplane moment where he's sort of standing in front of a photo of himself and he does the exact same pose and things. But I think he's great, and he sort of gets that sort of Godzilla-esque fight with Angel at the end in the model village. But this is in the Summerfield fight, you do have a scene where Simon Pegg basically takes down the Hound.
Summerfield, I can't believe I called it Safeway. Yeah. my apologies to listeners that are throwing pints at their iPhones or car stereos. I can only apologise, and it's on me, guys. It's on me. I'm sorry.
But it's the only film where you basically see sort of Simon Pegg take out the Hound, throwing him into a freezer full of frozen peas. So.
I think like one thing I like when I watch this movie now, I think of Timothy Dalton is such a droll character, character actor. And I was listening to the Adam Buxton podcast. I don't know if you've ever listened to it, but he does some really good interviews with Edgar Wright. Obviously, them two are friends. Adam Buxton was in Hot Fuzz, and they talk about this scene where they'd just finished shooting in sort of Sanford Town Centre, and Dr. Buckles, Edgar Wright and Timothy Dalton were just chatting away, and this little kid comes up and goes, "Excuse me, are you James Bond?" And had been clearly sent over by someone's parents, and Timothy Dalton mumbled under his breath, "Fuck off," to this little kid. And then the little kid went away, and then later on this police officer came over and went, "Excuse me, Mr. Dalton, we've had a complaint put in that you've sworn at a child." And they were just Edgar Wright and Adam Buxton were so amused that this police officer had to come off and tell off essentially James Bond for cursing at a child under his breath. And I just think that is just the perfect Timothy Dalton story. So if yourself or anyone hasn't listened to the Adam Buxton podcast, definitely check out the Edgar Wright one. It's some really good stories as they kind of look back on their time at making Hot Fuzz.
I definitely will. I caught the Greta Gerwig one after you mentioned it on a previous podcast, which was a fantastic interview. So I think I'll definitely check out this one as well.
So, what's your third choice then?
My third choice is going to be the opening scene from The World's End.
We've got a snap here. We have an official jinx.
Good. So, you've got that one as well. So for me, I think Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg, with their writing, they do foreshadowing better than I think anyone else in the business. This entire scene, basically, there's a video online. We might be able to put the link up to it, but it basically shows the opening scene playing against the rest of the movie. And basically, the opening scene, the way it plays out in the past, is basically the same story in the present. You just don't realize it yet. Basically, he's talking about the first attempt at the Golden Mile and how it all went wrong, and basically it sort of all ties in together with how the second attempt is actually going to go. They did a similar thing in Shaun of the Dead, where Nick Frost is sort of saying, after Simon Pegg gets dumped for the first time, he's like, "Look, we'll have a couple of Bloody Marys first thing, bite the king's head, grab a couple of little princess, stagger back here, and be back at the bar for shots." And essentially that is what happens in Shaun of the Dead the next day with the zombie apocalypse. And I think, they're just, the use of foreshadowing is just fantastic, and the way that he cuts and edits the scene is just perfect for me. So why did you pick it?
Yeah, it's for much such the same reason. I just think it's like a perfectly created introduction to a movie. As I said, it's not my it's probably my least favourite of the Cornetto trilogy, but it's got probably the strongest start of any of the movies. And it's just like the writing, the editing, the casting of these people that look like the spitting image of what you can imagine a younger Simon Pegg, Nick Frost, Martin Freeman, etc. It's just like the way it's all edited together, and it's that attention to detail where it could be so easy to kind of make an easy version of that, where it's like some people going into pubs, kind of running around, younger kids, end of story. But it's the meticulous level of detail that when you watch an Edgar Wright movie, every scene has been micromanaged, but in the best possible way. It's like, how can we get the best comedy out of this? How can we get the best kind of drama? How can we set things up? Like, they don't need to set things up. They could just do it as a simple kind of prologue to what's to come. But it's like the fact that they've tied this all in together, and it sums that up for me. Where like Edgar Wright will release a movie every few years, maybe every 3 or 4, maybe at this kind of current time. And that's because you can get the idea that they'll go through it draft after draft. They probably share it amongst themselves. They work on it, and I just think it's how that comes out at the end gives us such an incredible gift. And I think that's summed up in the opening to World's End. And I think that's why Edgar Wright is one of the greatest filmmakers on the planet. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there is extras on quite a few of the Cornetto trilogy sort of DVDs and Blu-rays where Simon Pegg and Edgar Wright will basically show you
the flip chart. They basically work through a
Yes.
flip chart for their script, and it basically shows how everything has been plotted out in advance. Edgar Wright, I think, certainly with Baby Driver, it's the movie's basically already cut and shot in his head before he goes to film it, and you can tell that from the opening scene of The World's End. And similar to probably like Back to the Future, I think, which I've always sort of said is the greatest film script in the history of the world, because there's not a single wasted gag or moment. Everything that's set up in the first 20 minutes of Back to the Future pays off in some way in the second, if in the rest of the film. And that's, I think, for the same with the Cornetto trilogy. Everything that sort of happens at the beginning, there's always a payoff later on, and it's the same with The World's End. The sort of the storylines sort of come back around, and everyone gets their moment to shine, and certain things which happened at the beginning, are brought back at the end. And also the use of music and stuff like that is just fantastic as well.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I picked it as well, is that when you think of like an Edgar Wright movie, you're almost as excited to get the soundtrack as you are to actually see the movie. And I think at the beginning, like I think it's Mark Summer's Magic that they use, where it uses the magic fairground, or I can't remember,
Magic Roundabout,
or whatever. Magic Roundabout, that's the one. That iconic theme, and it just uses it so well. And I think Edgar Wright, like, it was one of the reasons as well. Like it's like such an interesting piece of music to play along to something like this, that maybe we're sort of, I'm maybe overthinking, but like it kind of echoes, like everything kind of goes round in circles, that things will repeat themselves again, that they'll kind of try, it's looking to kind of recapture that magic, get back on the horse and go round again. And I think it's just really well, like, good use of music. And I think that's something Edgar Wright is up there with someone like Quentin Tarantino and Wes Anderson with doing, is using classic music to tie into the film.
I'd probably throw James Gunn in there as well. I think that James Gunn and Edgar Wright are better than the other two, because certainly in World's End, every song in that soundtrack has a purpose. So it's like when they're walking back into town for the first time, when they're back in Newton Haven, it's like, it's got So Young by Suede, and the lyrics are sort of talking about how it felt to be young. And then when Rosamund Pike's character turns up, it's like it's Pulp's Do You Remember the First Time? And that's a song basically about the first love and a potential sort of threesome thing that happened, love triangle, and that's sort of talking about the Paddy Considine and sort of Simon Pegg characters both being in love at the same moment. So every single song has a purpose in his soundtracks, and I think he's just fantastic at picking the right song for the right moment. But for me, I think World's End is my personal favourite of the Cornetto trilogy. I think I'm just at that sort of age, sort of late 30s now, where I've been to uni and stuff like that, and all my friends have sort of moved on away, so out of the city and stuff like that. So it was like a chance. So I actually organised a Golden Mile attempt in our hometown for sort of university sort of reunion sort of thing. So we sort of started off at the university at the St Macabar and sort of made it into town. It was just a great night, and just sort of something that really connected with me on an emotional level, I think, for where I was at that time anyway. So
yeah, like I think it's one of these ones that I can understand where you're coming from, because I think like the other day where, like, it's about like 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, I've had a few drinks, and I was like, yeah, that's good enough for me, I'm ready to go home now. Or I'm like, I'll maybe have a tap water. And I almost think, like, if my younger self could look at my older self and think, what happened to you? Where did it kind of, what have you sort of kind of done? The idea of like, pub after pub crawl, I don't know about that. But yeah, like I think it's one of these movies, I think it'll be curious to, it's almost like probably like the Before trilogy, in a way, that the movies that I think you connect with the most are the ones that you're the closest to, perhaps in your relationship or your age or your lifestyle. And things like, say, the first two, I've almost gone through those movies, I've related to the experiences, but I'm still just maybe a bit too young. I'm 31, what am I talking about, to sort of properly be in that sort of the what's married life like, kind of being in that routine. And I think it'll be interesting to see where The World's End ranks for me in maybe like 5 years time, something like that. And maybe I'll be looking to arrange a Golden Mile tour of Edinburgh. Absolutely,
I would recommend it, although we did switch, just total disclaimer, we did switch from pints to gin and tonics about halfway through, because we realised that we were getting old and we would never have made it if we'd continued drinking pints. So
Well, I'm up in Aberdeen for my mum's 60th in like a month's time, so what I'll maybe do is see if I can encourage her to do a golden mile in Aberdeen and see how that one works out.
Perfect, absolutely perfect, yeah. But it's that thing also as well of when you're doing a golden mile in a place that you used to grow up in or whatever, that the places you used to go to have now become other types of pubs and stuff like that, and it's just a weird trip down memory lane, so...
And I think it's like that bit that I think's almost so perfect in The World's End is that you go into all these pubs and it's like they always say, oh well, Weatherspoons are so unique and original, it's all these different exteriors, it could be a church, it could be a former music venue, but you go in and it's pretty much all the exact same with that chalkboard with it's like painted on chalk almost, and it's like you can have the coffee, you can have the salted caramel tart, you can have the chips, and it's in that same annoying font that they like highlight so well in the movie. And it's one of those things I always think when I see it now, I think it's just like The World's End predicted it.
Yeah, no, we did a Weatherspoons, Archibald Simpson's, yeah, that's a Weatherspoons, so yeah, no, we did a Weatherspoons on the way. So what have you gone for, or is it my number 2 or you number 2?
Yeah, well, we'll go with you. Yeah, I've got 2 to go. You've got 2 to go. Yeah, I'll
okay, my number 2 is the gunfight in Spaced. That's my number 2. From the second series of Spaced, the sort of the gunfight against the young boys, where they basically don't shoot them for real, but basically play fight with fake guns. And for me, it was just one of my favourite. That's my favourite episode of Spaced. My favourite episode of the first season is the one where they go clubbing. So I would nearly have picked something from that one, but for me, it's just this episode where it's all leading up to this fake fight, and there's just sort of, yeah, we've all done it, we've all been there, we've all acted like that, and just the way that it sort of turns into a sort of Platoon sort of a homage towards the end is just wonderful, and then it does lead on to that great sort of Jurassic Park line as well with Dwayne Benzie with his clever boys. So yeah, for me that's one of my all-time favourite Space moments. So.
Yeah, it's such like Space is just. Do you think Space is underrated, or is it just me that feels that? I don't know.
I think it probably is. I think. Maybe it was the fact that it only ran for 2 seasons. I think actually the best British TV shows only run for a couple of seasons. So like The Office was 2 seasons, Fawlty Towers I think was like 2 seasons, Space was 2 seasons. So they knew that they had a good thing and then they ended it rather than coming back and doing it again and again until people basically go, I'm fed up with this now, please stop. So no, for me, I think it is a bit under. I found Spaced, I think first time round actually, back when it first was just out. I managed to come across it, I think, because it was on just before or just after Friends back in sort of 1999. Again, showing my age. But staying in on a Friday night to watch Spaced on Channel 4. But, I found it in the character for Tim, for me, I think, I just sort of clicked with him straight away going, this could be me. This could be me, absolutely. And especially with the whole sort of Phantom Menace thing in the second season, I was totally there with him. So, for me, I clicked with it straight away and tried to get more people onto it. But I think it's something that people don't talk about in the same way I think that they should, with likes of sort of other TV comedies around that time, sort of like Alan Partridge and stuff like that. It doesn't sort of get the same sort of acclaim, even though I think it totally should.
Yeah, I suppose it's one of those ones. It doesn't seem to have much of a life on sort of television here. That with sort of Alan Partridge, you can probably find it on the back channels sometimes, or the DVDs seem always available in places like HMV or FOP. But where like Space, you almost feel like you need to sort of go out of your way to find it on, like, well, I need to search for it on 4OD. It's not ever promoted as like, we've got this on here, or like when you go into the DVD stores, it's just there's maybe one random copy there that's kicking about in the back waters of the shop and stuff. It just feels so odd, and I always think of Spaced in a weird way of like, it's an interesting what if in a way that obviously like Jessica Hines, Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg were the driving forces of the TV show, and obviously Jessica Hines gets a small sort of cameo in Shaun of the Dead, but I'm curious of like a world where she was more involved in the Cornetto trilogy, or perhaps the writing team. And it almost just seems a shame sometimes that when people talk about the success of Spaced, why it was such an appeal, people will go straight away to Simon Pegg, Edgar Wright, it's their show, when in reality Jessica Hynes is one of the hugely most influential people on that show. Like, the show would not have been the same, or even probably half as good, without her involvement as a
absolutely. I mean, yeah, because it was co-written by her and Simon Pegg. It wasn't Edgar Wright just was directing at that point, so he wasn't actually doing any of the writing. So it was all sort of down to them. And I thought the dynamic between sort of Daisy and Tim is what sort of makes the show, and that whole sort of Mulder Scully-esque sort of will they, won't they? Do you want them to get together? Do you not? You're not entirely sure whether it would work. But she's a huge part of that show, and yeah, I just wish that you'd see her more on TV and stuff like that, because I mean, she appears in The Odd Thing now and again, but no, I really would like to see more of her on TV or in film, I think.
Yeah, totally. It's just such a shame. She is such a talent. So hopefully, I can't remember what, there was a movie I watched a few years ago where she just popped up and was like, oh my god, Jessica Hynes has got such a big role in this, and I can't remember what it was for the life of me. But I'd love
I think
to see
it was
her
Bridget
more
Jones's Baby or something like that. Was it one of the Bridget Joneses?
Possibly. It doesn't. I haven't seen that one. I've seen the other two. But I'm sure it was something, that's for sure. Let me have a wee nosy. Let's have a wee gander on IMDb. The joy of editing means I can cut this down and make it sound like I found it straight away. She's with like 75 acting credits. What was it? Oh, was it Paddington 2? I think it was. Oh, maybe it was. I can't remember.
She wasn't.
Yeah, she was
the newsagent stall owner and
Cheryl as well in The Royal Family. She's so good in that role as well, just like this fat neighbour that just comes along and eats all the biscuits in the royal's house. It's like, it's such an understated but such a great comedy performance. I think that's one of the real shames of Spaced, is that Jessica Hynes never went on to have these sorts of huge roles that perhaps Nick Frost, Edgar Wright got. And I'm always curious perhaps about why she's sort of in the Cornetto trilogy as perhaps as little as she is. Maybe it was just that, it was just a one-time sort of working relationship that people so often have in these sorts of things. It's just a shame it was perhaps never a bit more than that.
Yeah. Well, so I guess so. What's your number two?
Yeah, my number two is A Shaun of the Dead, and there's so many great moments in this movie, but it's for sort of the visual flair and sort of the directing talent. Again, it's the let's wait for this all to blow over montage, and I just think it's so fantastic. I mean, it's one of these ones where Edgar Wright, if he died tomorrow, has been assured of immortality due to that scene alone. That I think when you think of things like that have happened, like Brexit, Donald Trump, all these things have happened, and how many times I've now seen that Simon Pegg shit grin with a cup of tea or a pint, just going, let's go and wait for this all to blow over. I just think it's such an iconic moment, and there's so many great moments just in that alone. The fried gold, and I think like it's just such a, when you watch it, like I can't remember the exact episode of Space, but there's something very similar that they did in that. But it just feels like Edgar Wright transitioned from television to cinema so incredibly well, and like the way he directs is so interesting. Like, you never feel that with his movies you can just sit back and just relax and watch them. Like, you go into them and it feels like you're taking sort of like cocaine, for example, not like in that sort of like it's completely intense, but you're always wanting to watch. There's always something going on, and I just think the way he constructs and edits, it's like it's such a burst of his personality every single time. And I think with this scene, it's like it's only like maybe 2 minutes, but they go through these like 3 different scenarios of how they're going to go, save their family and friends, and how they're going to get by. And I just think it works so well, and I just think it's just fantastic. And that idea where I think at the same time you've got Shaun of the Dead, and then you had something like Requiem for a Dream, that were like really going for these sorts of like quick cuts, like up close scenes with sort of things like mugs or injecting drugs. And I think it was such a fascinating kind of trend at that time to compare the two movies. And I just think this movie just does it so incredibly well, and it's one of these traits that I think when I see an Edgar Wright movie, I know he's going to do it so well, and it's like watching a feature-length trailer in a way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The plan sequence from Shaun of the Dead was very close to being on my list as well. He does a great job of basically condensing exposition and plot into snappy sort of montages using sort of like jump cuts, and also, yeah, like you say, the cuts are basically, you know, his cut of how Sean makes a cup of coffee is just like, you know, click, kettle goes on, coffee in, brew, tea, done. You know, it's that kind of thing. I think it's done so well, and yeah, just wait for this whole thing to blow over. And yeah, no, I know what you're saying about the memes that just pop up where anything bad happens, head to the Winchester, have a cold pint, wait for it all to blow over. So yeah, no, I think, yeah, he does a fantastic job of cutting to the chase and sort of getting exposition and plot done in such a neat, concise way. I mean, if you think of like The Walking Dead, you know, if, you know, they were to discuss a plan of how they were going to go about something, you know that it would probably take about 5 minutes for them to discuss how this plan was going to happen. And, you know, Edgar Wright can get it done in sort of 30 seconds and much more entertainingly.
Absolutely. And one last thing I'd say on it, like his use of sound is brilliant in these moments. Like, as you've seen, sort of the click, or like the click of the kettle, like in Hot Fuzz, for example, when he's waiting to head off to the other town, and it's just the noise of the trains, for example. He's mastered it as a visual and audio experience. So I'm curious, Dallas, what's going to be your number one pick then?
Well, my number one is this list sort of moved around again, but I think the number one for me is the sort of scene that basically encapsulates everything I love about Edgar Wright. It's got the music, it's got the editing, it's got the performance, and it is the first car chase in Baby Driver.
Fantastic choice. It was so close to making my list, but unfortunately didn't.
Yeah, no, I've just only this moment chosen the car chase from Baby Driver. I was going back and forth in my head between that and the Harlem Shuffle scene. But for me, yeah, no, I'm going with the car chase. I think it's something that he'd been planning to do ever since he sort of started making movies. And basically he's taken a song, Bell Bottoms, and has choreographed an entire car chase sequence to it. And it just sort of shows just the genius of Edgar Wright and the fact that he had this entire thing in his head and he's managed to put it down on film, and how it's just the scene builds as a beginning, middle, and an end, introduction to the characters, plot twist, you know, sort of when they start getting chased and stuff like that, and then how he manages to solve it. And it's just done so beautifully, so wonderfully. And again, with sort of sound effects, the editing, it was no surprise to me that Baby Driver was nominated for Best Sound Mixing and Sound Editing and Editing at the Oscars, because it absolutely deserved it. That was one of the major sort of plus points of that film for me.
Didn't Edgar Wright have it like when he like gave the script or something to the casting crew, where it was like, if we do this movie well, these will be the awards that we will be nominated for at the Oscars, will be the sound, audio. And I think, like, what a guy. I was so happy to see Edgar Wright, of all people, you know, when you see all the Oscar nominations, like, oh, it's the usual suspects. But to see Edgar Wright there, like, there's Edgar Wright at the Oscars, there's Edgar Wright at the Variety pre-party. There, like, it was so good to see. Like, you almost feel when you invested sometimes in a director's career, and we've almost got like 2 decades with him now, where you're like, you feel like you're rooting for his success. And I was so happy that he got, you know, obviously those nominations really aren't in his name, but like, everything about him is why those movies got nominated for those awards as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, the editing essentially had already happened in his head. It's just he got someone else to do it. I mean, I can imagine he probably would have been there over the guy's shoulder the entire time, making sure that everything was exactly the way he wanted it. So he probably was pretty much a co-editor. He just couldn't get a credit for it.
I mean, so kind of my final choice, sort of it's the way it's landed. I mean, I could have picked nearly any scene from this movie, and it's from Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. So unfortunately, Fistful of Fingers and Baby Driver have missed out on my 5 list. I should have added we were only allowed to pick one from each movie or show, but I went with the vegan battle, and I just think it was almost a perfect blend in that scene where it's like comedy, it's action, it's musical, and it just sums up, like, I think that scene has got like you could really say this about any scene, but I think it's the fact that like Edgar Wright is one of the best people ever for like casting movies, and I feel like when you sort of look at the list of people in this movie, I mean, Michael Cera was kind of known to people that watched Arrested Development. He was sort of the goofy George Michael Jr. character, typically comedy, but he's sort of a leading man in this movie. But then you think of like the cast, and there were names that are kind of household now, like Anna Kendrick, Aubrey Plaza, Brie Larson, Alison Pill, Mary Elizabeth Winstead, Ellen Wong, Chris Evans, and a lot of people have been cast even like a few years before this movie were made, just due to kind of scheduling. So I think Edgar Wright is one of the best people at like picking out talent, finding people that are genuinely brilliant at delivering comedy, deadpan. It's such a great cast, and I just think like the vegan battle, as I kind of said earlier, like I love Scott Pilgrim because it feels like such a fleshed out world. So when you're watching people like fighting but talking about vegan academy, and then the vegan police burst in like there's some sort of like 80s cheesy sci-fi movie that you've just found on like some back channel, it's like yeah, that perfectly makes sense. Like yeah, that's perfectly within the keeping of it, and it feels such a real world. It feels like these kind of comic book or film game worlds that like there is drawing influence from. And I just think Brandon Routh, he's another that I just wish had somehow gone on to develop a better career, because like he's a good Superman, but in this he's such a great comic actor, and I would love to have seen him do more comedy roles, much as the others have kind of gone on to do.
I totally agree. I thought his comic timing in this was superb, and yeah, it's just a shame that he's not gone on to do sort of more higher profile roles. I mean, yeah, like you say, he was a good Superman. He was probably just let down by the film, but shame that he never got another chance to do it. But yeah, no, I thought he was superb in this, and yeah, the whole sort of vegan sequences, and it is possibly almost ahead of its time in the fact that veganism is huge now, but back in the day, it wasn't as big, certainly in 2010, as it is now, certainly in the UK anyway. So I'm sure it probably, Scott Pilgrim would play a lot differently again, similar to Hot Fuzz, if you watched it back today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's one of those things, like the fact that we've only crossed over once with our lists is a testament to Edgar Wright's talent. So I hopefully when he releases a new movie, we've got even more amazing moments to add to kind of the catalogue of moments that we picked today.
I mean, I probably could have done an easy sort of 10, 15 sort of honourable mentions list, but then that would sort of defeat the purpose of holding it down to 5 in the first place. If you then go, but actually I've got blah 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 blah.
I reckon if we did this episode again in like 3 weeks' time, we would have had like a totally different topic.
Oh no, absolutely. I mean, I think I only managed to rewatch sort of Hot Fuzz and maybe a bit of Scott Pilgrim. If I'd actually sat down, rewatched everything, I mean, yeah, no, I probably would have had a completely different list to what I have today. So.
Absolutely. But thanks again for like coming on, Dallas, and stuff like that. I really appreciate it. I don't even know why I say like thank you for coming on. You're a regular man now on this and stuff like that. You're sharing this living room, as it were, with me and stuff. So if like people wanted to kind of reach out to you and talk about Edgar Wright with you, or like read your blog, where can kind of people find it all?
Well, they can find me on Twitter at champcelluloid, and my blog is championshipcelluloid.blogspot.com.
And you can find me on Twitter at Lee_Nostromo, and you can find the Nerd Party on Twitter at Join Nerd Party, on Instagram at The Nerd Party, on Facebook /The Nerd Party. So we'll have plenty of more exciting episodes to come in the next coming weeks and months. There's a lot of exciting movies kind of coming out now in the next few weeks and months anyway, with things like Deadpool and Jurassic World. So I'm sure we'll be diving into them, and we're nearing our 100th episode as well. So
I know
times ahead.
We've got more time to fill before the next Marvel installment, since we don't get Ant-Man and the Wasp until August, so
Absolutely, and I'm absolutely raging about it. But that's a story for another day. So I'm sure we'll bring you an Ant-Man and the Wasp episode in late November if Disney have their way. But thanks again for tuning in, and we really appreciate it. And if you've got any favourite Edgar Wright moments or scenes or memories, be sure to share it with us. Thanks for listening and not skipping to the end. Bye.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.
Welcome to Nerd